Hey guys, and welcome to another Hobby Tips. So this week we're going to be looking at how to water down your paints. It's something that you're going to have to contend with. It's a problem that we all, go through, whether at the beginning, the middle, or the advanced stages of this hobby. It's a constant struggle. Different companies have different consistencies of paint. How old they are also affects the paint. A whole range of different, influences are going to, affect your ability to get nice, smooth layers of paint on your models. There's a whole bunch of stuff there to go through. So for this week, we're just going to be looking at the basics of how to water down your paint correctly and how to, through both the field with your brush and by eye, work out exactly whether the paint is about right for what you're doing. Now, most people will say something around about milk or cream, something around about that, maybe somewhere in between those two things, and that's usually about right. It's like it's not as thin as water, but not as thick as full cream milk, full cream, that sort of consistency, but somewhere in the middle. And for most applications, that's correct. And you're looking at somewhere between, one dollop of paint is usually between 1 and 3, drops of water, and that will get you going. But it does vary, and by brand and by age of the paint. We're talking about acrylic paints here, so that's what you use water with. And so I've got a range in front of me. We've got some paints from Army Painter, a few different colors, some game color here in Vallejo from Vallejo Paints. We've got some Games Workshop ones, which you're definitely going to be using. We have the shade colors, a black, a metallic, so we can see how that works, and then some contrast so you can see the difference. And we're going to apply those here. We're going to be going through it, and then I've got my little friend here that we're going to be using those colors on, just so you can see the application and the finish that you get with different thicknesses of paint, different brands, and what you're going to be looking at. And so I'm going to set the palette up now, and let's get started. Alright, so to begin with, I've arranged some of the colors here. So we have the black from Citadel, the metallic, the dark metal from Citadel, now from Vallejo we've got the brown here, the game color white, and then from Army Painter we have the Corpse Pale, one of my favorite colors, and we have the Kraken here. Now I've left this like this so you can see. Part of the initial trouble with paints is that when you first shake them up, the different brands are going to react differently. You can see here with the Citadel that it's extremely gluggy. Citadel paints generally, as they age, get very thick very fast. Their lifespan of the current range anyway, not older recipes, but the current range doesn't last very long. So that's another negative to Citadel paints, is that they generally, not all the colors, but a lot of them go this very thick consistency very quickly, and that might have something to do with the seal on the top, but they generally don't last as long, which is kind of a problem, even though they are good to use, but they do generally do that. And the metallics have a very thick, gluggy kind of consistency as well, so a lot of people don't use their metallics. They'll use Vallejos and so on. We can see just by the way that the paint is sitting, see how nicely this is sitting. The Vallejo color generally, all three of them, as you can see, they generally hold their form. The structure of the paint is a lot more sturdy and a lot more even, and so it's holding its the fluidity of the paint is a lot more stable. Whereas with the Army Painter we're seeing a difference. So we do see some good consistency from the Corpse Pale, but their Kraken, this particular type of like neon color, is very difficult to do, and we can see here that the pigments and the binder that hold all this together aren't really playing along very well, and it requires a lot of shaking. But if you just do an average amount, this is what you're going to end up with a lot of the time. It's still usable, but it's a lot more difficult, so that's good for going through this process. So we're going to start by adding water to these. So the glaze and the shades we'll do in a second, but we'll just do these main colors first. So all you do is you just dip your brush into the water, okay, like that. So you've got it on the end of your brush. Just dip it into the end, and then we just add this into the color. Okay, and I would generally start by putting it next to it and bringing it across. That way you can add as you need. Okay, drag it across and make your color next to where you're doing it. And so there we go. We're starting to see, that's very thin, as you can see. right? So we probably want a little bit more paint in there, and we're going for that sort of milk to cream consistency, okay, something like this. So then when we drag it, we get some transparency, but as you can see, you can draw lines and it doesn't dribble or move away, and you're getting relatively thick paint. So something around that. So I've just added one. We might add a little bit more, okay, and there we go, a little bit more paint, and we're just moving this around until it no longer draws away. So it's holding its shape and form, and we're getting a little bit of transparency, and this is basically what we're wanting. So if we come across to our model here, we can now see what the effect is. So even with a thicker paint, okay, you can see now it doesn't run, you don't see it moving, you don't see it moving. It could be a little bit thin there, okay, but normally these thin coats take, as a lot of people know, 2 coats, right? So you can go a little bit thicker, but the thicker that you go, so if we add a little more to this and make this even a little bit darker, so I'll just move this out of the way so you can see, okay, so we start thickening up the paint. Now we're getting a darker shape there, and if we add this on, we'll just do it on the other knee. It should start to show up a little darker, although that's still not that much. We'll just add a little bit more of the paint, get it a little bit thicker for the purpose of this demonstration. But now you're going to start to contend with possible lumpiness, okay, but you will get a slightly stronger finish there, you see. So depending on what you're doing and depending on, like, I guess the application. So if it's going over white, you might go a little thicker, but I'm still within that range. If we take a look at that color, okay, it's still coming out nice and smooth. You're not getting any lumpiness. So if I was to, now we're just going to add the black straight out of the pot and see what the difference is there. So we take a little bit of this here. It still has some water with it. Obviously, if you're using a wet palette, you're going to get, some water mixing and on your brush, so it still does have that, but you can already see there, see how these little glints of light? That's the raised bumps on the paint, so there is definitely an issue there. And so let's have a go now, and we're going to place that on, we'll just put it on the leg here. So we just paint that on, okay, grab a bit more of it, just straight out of that pot, not even trying to dilute anything, and just put it on, and we'll see what so the coverage is better here, but what you'll find, although I don't know whether this camera is going to pick this up, but there is, I'll see if I turn it, you can see, hang on, put it there, see in the light how you've got these, you can see these little marks, little light lines of light, you can see the brush marks in that. Now that's going to dry like that, and so that's a problem when you're doing coverage. So the more of these kinds of, and you start layering and highlighting, you're going to end up with a very, very bumpy model by the end. Do you see how the light on that leg, there's all these shadows in it? That's from the paint. So it's creating this. So even if you try to smooth it out, and the more you play with the paint, once it's down, the worse this gets. So we want an even, smooth coverage in sort of one motion, okay, without the need to play with the paint. That's one of the biggest problems when you're trying to find that consistency, and then you realize it's too thick. You're going to end up with this. See all that speckly light there? That's a very bumpy surface. So you can already see that regardless of what's going on, you always need to add some amount of water, and usually it's 1 to 2 drops, and that's enough. So we can see here, even though this is a light color and you're going to go over it again, the smoothness, you're not seeing any of that stippling. Do you see how the light that's hitting that is showing no small little, like it's like a field of stars? Whereas here we're getting constant rippling. Okay, so now we come back in, add water to this, make our nice smooth consistency. So 1 to 2 drops in, and we're looking for that milk consistency again, and we're fighting this. You can see how I'm constantly moving it around, constantly trying to work it so that we can get that feeling of it dragging off. It shouldn't run like water. It should just stick to the brush, but come off really without any pressure at all. You should just be able to just draw that off like you're using an ink pen or something like that. It should just drag off, and you should see a little bit of transparency there, and that means that it's ready to go. So now we can do our second coat on this, and you'll instantly see that the second coat will darken and cover that. Now, if this was going over a black undercoat using a dark color, not necessarily black, but maybe something else like a dark blue or something, you probably wouldn't even need a second coat. It would probably just go on really nicely. And while this is wet, when it's thinner, you can actually still play with it a little bit, and you won't get any of that mark making. So see how the light is a lot smoother? We're not seeing any of those lines. There's like a little tiny bit of roughness there, but that's got more to do with the layers of paint that this guy's had before applying this. That's got nothing to do with the black that's gone down. So this model has had a lot of different colors on it. It's my test model, so it has a lot of colors, but it's still relatively smooth. So we can see here though, now if we look at the difference there, now that that's dry, see that all those lines that you're seeing in that surface? Okay, so you can already see the difference of just adding 1 or 2 drops of water to your paint and trying to control that and allowing that second layer. You're going to get a much better finish. Now on here, this one also, even with a slightly thicker version, still works. We're not seeing any of that. So there is a bit of give. You can see here that it's not an exact science. On the one hand, I added probably about 2 drops of water for this one with 2 layers, and on this one was more like sort of 1 drop, a little bit thicker. Okay, but we're seeing a pretty good consistency there. So there is a give. It's not something, a recipe that you can just apply all the time, because it's going to react differently by color. So now let's move on to, now that we've got some black down, let's try applying some of this metallic to that and see how that goes. So if we clean the brush, and we'll take a look at this metallic. All right, so with this one, okay, you can see how thick and gluggy that is. See how that's just really thick. There's furrows in it, there's little divots and so on. You can't apply this directly to your model, and you definitely shouldn't. Okay, so I don't care what you see online or any YouTube or anything like that, I can promise you this is not a good idea. Okay, whatever they're doing, they're experienced, and they're obviously doing something particular. In my life, I've not just experience with this hobby, but I worked for Games Workshop for many years, and I've taught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people on painting tables here in Australia. And I can tell you that the first thing you teach someone is to water down their paints. No matter the brand, even Games Workshop, doesn't matter what the company says that the paint is, it always needs a small amount of water dilution to get it working correctly. No matter the brand, doesn't matter what they claim, they always end up, and because you're not getting it fresh, right? Maybe the fresh pot is almost great straight out of the bag, but generally speaking, the paints you're using have been sitting for a long time, and they all thicken over time, right? It's just something that happens. The air gets in, it starts to dry out, it gets thicker, it gets harder. So you always want to add. So with this consistency is very similar to that thicker black. Okay, we're also contending with now the metallic, and the metallic reacts a little differently. You got to be careful not to water this down as much. Okay, so we're doing less. So when I'm putting the brush into the water, I'm probably only letting it go just to the halfway up the bristles, basically, and just getting a little bit less water on that brush, and then adding it in. And we're dragging this across, and we're adding more of that metallic in, because what you'll see is if I don't add enough of the metallic in, it starts to separate, and you'll see that in the water. All the pigment starts to break away, and so we don't want that. We want enough, and this is good for metallics in a sense, because you can actually see the reaction going on, and that allows you to then control what you're doing. So we keep mixing this up until we get a look that doesn't look like it's all separating. So that's already, just with that small amount of water, is enough to activate this paint and get it working. And as we move it around to get everything mixed, you're getting that nice consistency there. So now if I drag this out, it's not separating anymore. We can draw it out just like we did with the black, but you're not getting any separation, and it's not dribbling around like water. Okay, and so that's what we're looking for. And once that's nicely mixed, we can now apply it to the model. So we have some on the brush, Let's get our little tester, our firstborn, and let's see how we go. So we'll put it onto this area here, and we'll see what the coverage is like. And this is basically what you should be seeing. You should be seeing something that is a little bit transparent, so a bit of the black should be showing through, or whatever color is underneath, but not a lot of it. It should be pretty good coverage, but maybe not in one go. Other brands will get better coverage than the Games Workshop one, but with Games Workshop paint generally, 2 thin coats is the thing, you know, and we all know that that line, and it's a good line because it's true, and not just for Games Workshop colors either. So that's what you're going to get with 1 coat of a thin down metallic using Games Workshop. So it will require a second one. So now let's see what happens. So we've got this build up of paint here, this thick guy here. Let's now try some of this paint that doesn't have very much of the water, and let's see what we get. So we've got some here. Actually, that's still mixing with the water that's on my brush. We'll try to get it dry. Let's open this up, and we will see what happens when we just add just this nice, see that thick paint there, and let's see how we go adding it to the black that we see. It has all those bumps. Okay, so we're going to try adding it to that, and we'll see how that goes. So it's all dry, that nice thick paint. Let's get it on the model and see what happens when we do that. So we come across here and we're just adding it on. Now obviously you're going to get much better coverage, okay, but the thing about adding thick, and you can also see that when you're adding it you're getting too much on the end. You can barely see the tip as well. This is a classic new problem that occurs. We put too much paint on the end of the brush and it just goes everywhere. And so if we see now, we can see now that not only are we getting the same stippling problem, do you see that? The coverage isn't much better, by the way. If you're looking at that, the coverage is almost identical. So the amount of paint with metallics doesn't always equate to a better coverage, okay? And we're now seeing, at least with Games Workshop, and we're now seeing a lot more of those bumps show through. So they're now adding to the ones that were underneath. So you're getting a bigger problem here, okay? So there you can see some of the dramas you're going to have, but that's why you want to have this thing where you drag it across and mix it up until you can feel that nice smoothness in the paint, and that's going to give you a better finish. So now if we were to take our nice mix over here now, and over time I just added a little tiny bit more water. If it starts to go like this, if you can see the furrows going in the paint and it's working like as if it's thick paint, add a little bit more water just with the tip of your brush, and make sure that when you drag it off you're not getting that sort of consistency, and then we go again. And so we just paint that on, okay, and now we should get a nice smooth finish. Okay, and obviously some colors you might be able to get this done in 1 coat, but generally speaking it's going to be multiple coats, but you get out something nice and smooth. So see how there's none of that stippling going on. You're getting the speckle look because it's obviously a metallic paint, but you're not getting those really deep furrows there. It's basically smooth. Okay, and then on here we're seeing that those deep lines working on it. All right, so now we'll move on to some of the, I guess, matte colors. And so that was 2GW colors, and now we're going to be looking at the Vallejo and seeing how they go. And so Vallejo's colors are a little bit more stable, as you can see by how they're holding. They've been sitting here for quite some time, drawing up water from underneath, and this from the wet palette, and they're still holding their own there. They're not breaking down. So that's a plus with them. You can see here the Kraken is basically having a really bad day. Unfortunately, it is such a great color, but it's very hard to use. So we're going to see what happens when we try to contend with that. So with this color, it is actually much smoother going on straight, so you'll have a better time with it, but it is still going to have the same problem. And so again, we just tip the end of our brush into the water, not too much, okay, just a little bit on the end, and then we're going to drag out a little mix here and find our consistency again. And you just keep dragging it through until you see that nice smooth drag. Okay, nothing should be separating, nothing should be coming away, and you should be able to just draw it out like a pen, just with the tip of your brush. And you know, this helps to build up your skill at control. Okay, it shouldn't be moving, there shouldn't be anything moving. This is really nice. So this only took like one little drop, and that's probably about $1 of paint. Okay, a bit more. It's probably like a little bit more paint to water ratio, right? So not that much. And we got a nice, and you can see all the bristles. Let's see if I get that in focus for you. All the bristles you can see, and the point you can see. That's a very important feature. All right, so let's see on our lovely little test here. So let's we may as well go over this black here, and we'll see what happens when we go over the black. So it should again be quite transparent, but the color should dry very smooth. Now, one thing with Vallejo is that these particular model colors are designed to be very matte, because they're usually done for historical wargaming, so they're often very matte finishes. So even though that looks shiny now, that's going to go very, very matte. Okay, so we can see there it's working quite well on black. Let's see what the color looks like on a bit of white here. So we'll add a little bit up here maybe. We'll just add that on. It obviously covers a lot easier on a white surface if you want it bright compared to, let's say, a black. All right, but we're getting a very smooth finish. So over a dark color, you're going to have to put another coat on. Okay, but again, no speckling in the light. If you can see that, it's a smooth transition. Do you see that? There's little tiny ripples, but that's all going to matte out very quickly. Okay, definitely nothing like what's going on in the surface of this rougher textured surface here. So that will dry up, and then while we're doing that, let's see what happens when we add. So the white, we'll see how the white goes. So with the white again, you can tell by the consistency of the paint that it's quite a thick one, but a very smooth paint, and you'll see that straight away. You're not getting the furrows. Like when I move that around, it's not creating those deep furrow marks there that you get with the metallic. So now we just wipe that off, and it should just draw out like milk. See that? And that's about right. So again, it was like one small bit of water to your paint, and we're ready to go. And you just drag it out, and somewhere in here is what we're looking for. And we can see all the bristles on that brush. Okay, and the point is there, it's ready to go. And so let's have a go at adding some of this white. So we'll just do a little bit, hopefully this is dry, and we'll see how that goes. So we'll just put a little bit on the edge here. Okay, so you're seeing and the thing with white is that it's always going to be a little bit chalky. It's just a natural product of this color. Okay, but we can see, and that's with it thinned down. Okay, so it's still, again, we'll require 2 coats. Now if we try it on the other side without any water, you're really going to be struggling. It's going to start to get very thick. Okay, so if we put this on here, it's better for highlighting. So if you're line edge highlighting, you're going to do a thicker paint than if you're covering a flat surface. That's another trick. Right, so line highlights generally are going to be a little thicker in their consistency, so that they grab better to that edge, and they're not going to run. But you're also going to have to be careful with it. So if you're doing a flat surface, you're going to do more of this type of method where you're building up a couple of layers. And then if you're doing your line edge highlight, you can see how much more thick and full that color is. So whatever color you're using, you're generally going to do that. And with white, you're definitely going to be paying attention to that, because it's one of those colors that gets very chalky. Same with like bone colors or any other colors like that. They can get very chalky for sure. All right, so this one's going a bit long, but anyway, we'll keep at it. So the corpse pal now, we can see if we just drag that across, it's also quite thick, and a little bit different to the Vallejo and the white here. They're a little bit smoother. You know, Army Painter is very much like old Citadel paints. So they have a similar, see that how I can cut through that? See that furrow there? You can't do that with the Vallejo colors. But with the Army Painter ones and with Games Workshop, you get this. So you're going to have to be careful. See how it keeps its form there? You can see all those shadows and highlights. So that means that it's going to need a touch more water than you would normally go. And this is a light color. So again, we're going to have that problem with chalkiness in certain circumstances. So I've added 2 drops so far. Okay, maybe even a third with the tip of the brush until we can get that nice drag. Okay, so that's looking all right. Maybe a little bit more. So now that's been like, you know, 4 drops maybe to get that color working in the same way. So it's needed a little more. And now if we take a look at it, we'll do it on this side here. We can see that its coverage is a lot less, and in some cases you're still getting a little bit of that mark making, because again, these light colors generally do that. But it should dry off pretty smooth and matte, and it will require a second coat. Now, if this was a highlight color over a darker flesh tone, you wouldn't get any of this, and all of these little imperfections would just become part of the flesh tone, and so you wouldn't notice it. But because we're doing this straight over white, you're seeing the true coverage of the color. Okay, so don't worry too much about that, because generally speaking, you're not painting these colors in isolation like this. They're going to be in layers over other colors. So yeah, but we're seeing it is pretty smooth though. If we look at the light that's coming off it, the light's relatively smooth. You know, we're getting a stippling just again because of the surface of the plastic itself, not so much from the paint. When you look at the one down here, what you're getting is, if we get that light happening there, you'll be seeing little shadow lines and wave lines in that paint. That's the actual marks that the paint has made. So you don't get that with the rest of them here. So we can already see now how smooth all that is. Okay, so that will require a second coat. The other one does not. You can't get the lines on that, but there'll be similar lines on that white on that side to the metallic. Not quite as bad, again, because Vallejo's consistencies are better for this type of application, but you know, overall you're still fighting the same fight. Okay, and so finally let's take a look at this Kraken and have a go at that and see what we get. Now this Kraken is going to be crazy, so let's just lift a bit of this up. We'll just mix it together because it's separating quite heavily there. So that all of that extra little bit of liquid you're seeing is actually the binder, like the medium and the pigment all separating. So we've mixed it up now. So it's actually a color that we can use. Okay, that's all you have to do. But it is very, very thin. See that? You almost don't need any water at all. And in fact, for a color like this, that might be what you do. But as a course of action, I generally, with everything, now you just use the very, very tip. Just put that little tip of the brush into the water and just add a tiny bit of water to that and drag it across just to give it a little bit more movement, because this color is acting so randomly, you don't know how it's going to react on the surface. And so a little bit of water, even at this stage of how runny this is, I'm still adding that tiny bit of water, and it'll just mean several coats. This is usually a highlight color or something you're doing right at the end, so you'll probably need 2 coats of it, or even mix a little bit of white with it. And the Vallejo white here will add a bit of stability to this, or another similar tone, or a bright yellow, or whatever you're using. That will help make this color a little bit stronger and not so, I guess, yeah, broken apart. But as you can see here with this, it's now holding its shape and it's not coming apart, and we're not getting that super watery thing. So let's have a go. It is going to come out very light, so we'll just put it, let's say, just on the back here, on this leg. So we just run that on, and we can see how transparent it is. As I said, this color is really just a highlight color. It needs other colors underneath in order to make it work. But we can see now, same deal, quite smooth. It is still working quite well, but we've needed to just be more careful with the amount of water. Very, very small amount added, and now we're getting the right consistency. okay? And so that's how that works. So that's one of those colors you want to mix it up, add your little tiny bit, mix it again, and then get that consistency there. So that's, in a nutshell, how to control your paints on several different colors and different brands. We're seeing differences over the whole lot. And so finally now, before we end up, I'll take you through the glazes. So this is going to be cutting a bit long, but you know, I think it's worthwhile. Alright, so now it's glaze time. So we have in front of us here the Null and Oil, okay, from Citadel. We've got their shade, the purple one. Then we've got the contrast, okay, this sort of greenish contrast here, and some of the medium here. Alright, so all of these things are already very watered down. Now, mostly you're going to see people just adding things like Null and Oil and stuff straight on. Mostly that's used for things like metallics. I'm still a proponent of watering these down. I've never, in 30 years of doing this hobby, ever gotten any ink wash or any kind of shade or anything like that and taken it straight from the pot and put it on my model. Never, okay? And maybe when I was like a little kid. But the moment I learned how to paint, that stopped happening. These things should also have a small amount of water added because it gives you so much more control, okay? If you put it straight on, you're contending with very thick stain lines, all this stuff. You're better off that two thin coats method, even for things like ink washes, than you are trying to just slap it on in one go. It's not helping you, okay? It's bad technique. Well, it's not bad. It's just it's giving you a false idea of how to build your understanding of paint and how to paint models. And unfortunately, it's a thing that exists in the early days of painting. You know, you put your base color on, you slap your ink wash on, and boom, you're done. Or in the case of now contrast, put the contrast on, and boom, you're done, right? But it's not really the case. And what you're losing all the steps that are about controlling colors. Layering and stuff is slower going and all that sort of thing, but that's actually teaching you all of the correct early phase things that you need to know to actually get your models painted well and smooth. Okay, this is all about smoothing down and getting those nice smooth finishes on your model. So you always want to add a small amount of water, no matter what you're doing, whether it's metallics or flat colors or whatever, whether we're doing like an ink wash for metallic or we're doing a glaze, which I'm going to show you here. So we're going to, on the Null and Oil, we're going to do like the ink wash idea, to stain metallics and so on, or other colors. For the purple, we're going to water this one down to a glaze and glaze something. And then here I'm going to show you how to use these contrasts in a more appropriate method than taking it straight from the pot. The straight from the pot method for the contrast is generally only designed for doing it straight over their Wraithbone or Grey Seer undercoats, which are designed for contrast specifically. Okay, that's a whole different method. But if you're adding contrasts to colors or later stages of the thing, like an ink wash, then you're not going to be taking it straight from the pot unless you want that color and building it up. And again, when you see people online doing this, they're much more experienced at understanding what they're doing with that. And so just do it. Just add the little bit of water in, or in this case, maybe some of the medium into that to dilute it down, so that we get a more transparent finish. And I promise you that will work better for you, 100%. So let's get started. So first up, we're going to do this this Null and Oil wash. So this is going to be used like an ink wash. Okay, so we just add a small drop of water, just like we do with everything else, and just dilute it down a little bit. Okay, and that's just going to make that consistency a little bit I guess more watery and run a little bit more, and that's actually what we want. Okay, so it's just one little drop of water into that drop just to break it up a bit and not have it quite so strong. Okay, and then when we lay this across the surface, it's going to be a little bit more subtle, but you should see the ink wash moving into those cracks a lot easier, and you shouldn't get as many pooling areas if you move it around with your brush. So we'll see it up here on the Aquila. Okay, so see how it's a little bit more watery. So what that enables us to do is then you wash your brush off, dry it off a bit, get your point back, and now you can just move that around with your brush and fix up where it's sitting, okay? But it's just going to be a subtler finish, but allows you then to choose whether you want to go back and redo some of those areas, and you're going to get a much nicer result. So that's how that works. Now, if we wanted to glaze something, okay, so let's say we're going to glaze. So we're not going to put this purple straight on. If you were to put that purple straight on, I'll show you how that will look. You know, it's going to just be too dark and just completely destroy that color. Okay, do you see that? It's not going to give you what you want. So we're pretending this is like some flesh here or something like that, right? And it's going to add a much deeper, darker stain because there's way more pigment in it. Okay, the lighter it is and the less pigment that's in it, the lighter your staining is going to be, which is easier to go back and fix or mask or whatever you want to do after. So that's another aspect of why you add water to these. So if we're going to add water to this as a glaze, okay, we want to get it much lighter than this. So you're going to see I'm adding, that's 2 drops, and there we go. So it's probably around about 2 drops, almost the consistency that you would do with normal paint. Okay, that's now lighter and more transparent, and then we're going to wipe off most of it off our brush, okay, and so that you don't have a lot of it on there. And again, it's going to be 2 coats. So we're going to let's do it around this area here, and we're just going to run it in and very carefully glaze that area and create a kind of soft staining, okay. And if you see, oh, it might be pulling up a little bit, then you wipe your brush, get it clean, and very carefully just feather that edge while it's still wet. Okay, you got to be quick, but you can instantly get that away if you want to. Okay, so it's a process of going back and forth. But now we can see here with this glaze that it's only just very lightly staining that. And so this allows you then to come back in and add more and more and build up a shifting color. Okay, if that was flesh, you know, around the eyes or around somewhere like that, that would look really nice, as opposed to this. Can you see how heavy that line is that's being stained there? If that was on your face, you've just destroyed that face. If that was like a flesh wash on a you know, it might look good from like 2 feet away or whatever, or a meter away, but every time you look up close at your models, and it might be true that you know, that's all you care about, like that distance away, which is true, but you do pick up your models from time to time and have a look at them. They might be on your shelf, right? And you want to look at them, and that is gonna grate you a little bit, even if you think you don't care about it. And just the simple additive of a small amount of water like that can change the whole appearance of your model, and you know, make you generally feel better about what you're doing. And that's part of this, right? Because you now have a bit of confidence. You know that you can control the paint, you know that you can control the way it goes down. You've got a bigger sense of achievement, and it's instantly going to level you up. You're going to start seeing things in different ways and how to do it. Okay, so that's definitely something to consider. So that's how you use that. So glazing, almost the same like doing normal paint, 2 or 3 drops to get it quite thin. Ink washing, probably 1 drop, okay, into the ink, okay, and that will be enough water. So they're your 2 consistencies there, all right. And no matter what you're doing, I would just start with that as a course. It should look something like this, okay, when you're ink washing or glazing, quite thin, quite non-destructive, so you can add the amount that you need. It is going to slow you down in the beginning, but it's going to speed you up long term because your dexterity is getting far greater as you go down. Alright, so finally we're coming on to contrast. Okay, so contrast is, like I said, if you're using it straight from the pot, then it's designed to be done in one specific way, which is the zenithal type undercoating, which is sprayed from above with the Wraithbone or the Gracia, the ones that actually have contrast written on them. Okay, they're specifically designed for this purpose, and those undercoats, the ones that have the contrast written on them, will then give you the correct kind of base for this contrast to lay on the top of, to stain the color correctly and give you that shadow and the highlights. And that's good when you're starting out. You can go to the Warhammer YouTube page and find one of their tutorials on how to use contrast. Like a great one to look at is the one that they did for Poxwalkers for Death Guard. it shows you how to do it, and it does all the different colors and stuff. I'm pretty sure that's the one they've got on their site, but there's a whole bunch of them that use contrast, but it's all done over that kind of Wraithbone or Gracia type zenithal undercoat. And so that's what you're doing. And in any other case, in any other situation that is not that, okay, I would be adding a little bit of even water. But in the early days, you can add water to this, but really what you want to do here, and this is used more for glazing. So these contrast colors are basically taking the place of your shade here, mainly because of the level of transparency. It's almost like an oil glaze. So that's what we're doing here. So it's a very different type of thing to this. This is what you want to start with. This is the next sort of step of like mucking around with changing colors. So what we do, instead of adding water, we bring this across like this, okay, and we start adding in the glaze medium. And so we've got a full dollop of the glaze medium and just adding in small amounts of that pigment until we get what looks like an ink wash. Can you see that? And we keep mixing it up until we get a good even consistency through it, and this becomes like a glaze. So it's actually quite relatively thick in its consistency, but it does draw off the same way. Do you see how that's drawing off just like a paint or something like that? Okay, and this is going to be our glaze, and so we want basically drawing the pigment in and creating this color. And now if you wanted to, you could add a small amount of water into that as well if you want it to be a little bit thinner, which you can do. And now we have something that's a little bit like this and a little bit like paint. Okay, so it's in the middle, and this becomes a really good filter layer for shading something. So if we come over to where's it gonna, we'll do it on the flesh here so you can see it more readily. So now we're going to just glaze this across. Okay, and the same thing again. You dry your brush, and then as it's drying, come in with your dry brush and just feather that edge if you're doing something on flesh or on a flat surface, and you can just gently feather that out. Okay, and you won't get a mark, but you shouldn't get much of a mark with the contrasts. The contrasts are actually quite good at like not giving you too much of a mark, but you have to be careful with contrast. It's all about that one motion again, just like we did with the black, all these thicker colors like the metallics. You're looking for that singular motion. The more times you have to put your brush to the paint while it's drying, the more marks you're going to get. So if we have a look now, we're not getting any of that rippling, and it's okay. But with contrast, the big problem is that that mark making. So if we take it again, let's say with a little bit more of the pigment so we can see it this time, and let's put it on maybe the top here. Okay, so what you'll end up with is you'll start to have to fight with I guess that bumpy surface again. The more medium that you add into that contrast, the thicker it's going to become, and the more you're going to have to fight. So that's still relatively thin. But if we were to add another layer and another layer, you'll start to get this same problem that's happening down here. So you do have to work that, and that means adding just maybe a little touch of water to it to thin it down and give it the consistency that it needs in order to do it. So now we can see. So there's different ways to apply this, and as I said again, it works best as this type of thing up here over a zenithal with the correct undercoat, and you'll get this type of finish. But what it's really good for, I personally believe, is as glazes, filter layers for particular colors, so that you can shift them, because it has so much pigment in it, and you're able to then get this kind of really quick color shift in a very subtle way, easy way, without getting all of that staining. So you see how that works? If that was flesh or monster flesh or something, you get some little interesting effects without needing to add too much. But you'll only get to that by practicing this watering down process, and then you can start to see how these things can be used in different ways. So you can do this kind of early phase kind of method with contrast, or you can start to play with it here. Okay, so they're your two styles, but even then I'm still adding a little bit of water, and I'm using that contrast medium to break down that pigment and keep it quite light, and then I can add my second layer if I want to. Okay, I know that's kind of counter to what contrast marketed for, but I feel like that's better for you in the early days to learn how to control what you're doing on the palette. All right. All right, so we're through it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this has helped. I hope this gives you a bit of an idea about controlling and thinning down your paint and working with it. Obviously, I'm using a wet palette here, so it will work basically the same on the dry palette, but you have less working time. So the wet palette allows you to paint for longer with the paint. On a dry palette, it's like on a bit of plastic or whatever you're using, it's going to obviously dry up, which means you're going to be adding water successively over time to keep the paint thin enough. So obviously it's going to be a little bit more control with a dry palette to a wet palette, but it's essentially the same thing, and the ratio of water to paint is basically the same, but you're just going to have to work it a little bit faster on a dry palette to a wet palette. So yeah, that's all my I guess hobby tips for that one. It has gone on a long time, so please share this video, like it, comment, subscribe, you know, all that kind of stuff. It really helps me out. I hope this helps people in the early phase of their journey into the hobby and gets them going. It's something that I've been teaching people for years. As I said, I worked for Games Workshop, so I taught people how to do this every day for many years, hundreds and hundreds of kids and older people too. So it's something that you have to learn, and definitely it will give you rewards. It will definitely pay off in the end. I promise you that. Once that penny drops and you understand all this stuff, suddenly a whole world of possibilities open up to you, and you end up with you know, it's like a little superpower. So yeah, I hope that's helped. Good luck with it, and I'll yeah, catch you on the next one.